Welcome everyone, and welcome to the panel, The Future of Online Games. I am Fernando Moreno, a venture fellow here at Newchip, and I will be leading this panel. Today, we will be talking about the current trends in the video game industry, as well as the main challenges developers face when launching new online games and growing their community. Without further ado, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce our special guests that are also founders at Newchip Accelerator. Our first guest is Deborah Lygonis, CEO and co-founder of Friendbase, a virtual world where young people from all over the world can meet new friends, play games, and learn. Friendbase's vision is to help teens work together in a collaborative environment rather against each other. Our second guest is Ella Romanos, COO of Fundamentally Games, a company that works side by side with early-stage developers during their game development journey. Since 2008, Ella has been helping build and manage game development teams and has deep understanding of the resources, processes, and commercial considerations through being directly responsible for releasing over 50 games. Our final guest is Justin French, founder, creative director, and CEO of Dream Harvest Games, an indie studio based in the UK focused in building online games that combine evolving narrative with challenging gameplay. Their most important game so far is Nora Slicers, a post-cyberpunk strategy game that offers an experience for both competitive and solo players. Ella, Deborah, Justin, thank you so much for joining us today. To kick off this panel, I would like to start by drawing on your knowledge and experience regarding the current context of online games and the trends in the industry. In the last few years, we have seen an incredible number of premium games hitting the market and becoming worldwide hits. We were just speaking about that, Justin, in that a lot of investors are focusing in getting this type of companies on board. These companies are generating all these billions and billions of US dollars in sales. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of established studios staying with the more traditional business models in which they are either charging a one-time fee or a subscription model. Where do you feel the industry is going regarding free-to-play business model versus this subscription and one-time payment model?
I'll just dive in there.
Yes, please. go for it.
Well, I mean, I think I don't think it's correct that a lot of people are staying with the traditional model, as you called it. I think that the industry as a whole has moved already to a living games model, whether that means full free-to-play with in-app purchases and ads, whether that means premium with DLC. Even the AAA games have ongoing content and charge for ongoing revenue streams. So I think the change has already happened. I think it happened quite a while ago, and I think that is only going to increase. And I think that obviously mobile and browser games have probably led the way. PC is happening, and I think console will get there as well. And my belief is that it's better for developers and it's better for users when done right. And that's very important because it has been done badly, and that has in some cases damaged perception. But when done right, essentially, it reduces barriers to entry to games and should enhance the player experience.
Absolutely. I think the players especially are now expecting to get an online game for free. It's like the nature of the current environment. I don't know if you have something to add, Deborah and Justin, regarding that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole idea of having a recurring revenue model is something that is here to stay and growing. And as Ella said, more and more companies are transitioning towards that. Yeah, I think that that's something that is definitely here to stay, and it is evolving.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I don't think we'll see the disappearance of kind of short experiences, though. There are still a number of studios that focus on smaller one-time purchase type experiences. I mean, a great example was Us2 Games. With their product Monument Valley, which was very popular. But a lot of these smaller studios who are developing these types of smaller games are going to be relying a lot more on these big subscription services such as Xbox Live, potentially Stadia, depending on what they decide to do next, and things like Apple Arcade. But yeah, I also agree. I think more and more studios are looking at how they can incorporate recurring revenue models into their products. Not every type of game suits this type of model, or if it does, if it doesn't and it tries to get ham-fisted into it, it can often be at the detriment of the design of the game. But I think due to the sheer number of games being launched across all platforms, developers are going to have to start thinking more carefully about how they can generate revenue beyond the initial sale. Though free-to-play has its own issues in terms of ongoing costs, which are astronomically higher than premium titles.
Yeah, definitely. And just touching in the different technologies that the gaming industry is using right now. You mentioned Stadia, basically streaming video games without the need of having this huge computing power on your streaming device. Do you feel that the new technologies are being adopted to the mainstream games and the players will be able to actually use them in the future, Justin? Specifically for this type of streaming services, you have Google, Amazon also working on that right now. Where do you feel this is going?
One of the key issues with services like Stadia, Xbox, xCloud, I think it's called, and other similar streaming services is that the infrastructure isn't quite there yet. The issue is that, yes, these big companies are investing, hundreds of millions into these streaming platforms, but the majority of users can't access them in a way that would make those games playable. And I think until the global telecommunications infrastructure is actually in a state where everyone can get gigabit networks to their home,
yep.
We won't see a rise in these true commercialization of these types of streaming platforms, because the technology is just not there yet, in my mind.
I think other technologies that have had like a really big impact in the last few years, especially with the release of Pokemon Go, was augmented reality. But to be honest, I don't see a lot of virtual reality, augmented reality actually being adopted as much for the common players, like the regular player, for not only computers or PCs and consoles, but also on the mobile ecosystem. I don't know, Ella, Deborah, you have a lot of experience, and you are also addressing these type of concerns with the company, Ella. If you could provide us a little bit more information in why are these new technologies not being adopted so fast by the game developers?
Yeah, I think I think there's several things. Firstly, I do think that VR has progressed. I am actually more positive about it than I was a couple of years ago, and I've always been pretty skeptical in terms of it as a commercial potential. Certainly in entertainment games anyway. But what we have seen is that, we did some research recently, and, if you do get in the top 5, which is very hard, then actually you can make significant revenues. That was not the case a few years ago. The problem is that still the difference between the top games and all of the others is huge. You basically either get in that or you don't make any money. So ultimately, my belief is that it will never, it's about barriers to entry. And, the requirement on the user to buy a VR set, connect it, have space to do it, all of those things, just make it so that it will never become mainstream in the way we mean mainstream these days, because the reality is that most people play games. So to be mainstream in the games industry now means that it has to be accessible to basically everybody. And that's just not going to be the case with VR as we know it now. AR is more accessible in some ways, but also is equally difficult in other ways, because actually to have an AR game, you have to create something where you go outside or whatever else it is you've got to do on mobile. And, Pokemon Go has been obviously a massive hit, but apart from that, there has even, games developed by the same company haven't done that well. So there's definitely a challenge there. I think there's still a lot, it still remains to be seen whether there is a repeatable business in AR, whereas I think in VR there clearly is. It's just very niche.
Yep.
I agree on that. I mean, we early on we actually looked into creating a VR version of Friendbase, and we figured out pretty quickly that it was just not worth it. because it wasn't mass market, and the cost of development would have been astronomical to be able to get something decent out there. In regards to AR, though, I think that it's a fun tool to use if you want to do campaigns. And I think that's something that we'll be seeing more of in the future, that it might not be a complete AR game, but there will be shorter games or campaigns using AR. At least that's what we want to do.
Obviously, you and as a follow-up to what you just answered, Deborah and Ella, you mentioned these barriers of entry. Ella, you mentioned the high developing costs. Deborah, specifically for virtual reality, do you think the biggest obstacle right now is that you need to have the equipment to play these type of games, or is it the current infrastructure, or that you don't have the computing power on your consoles or in your PCs? What is like these barriers of entry you mentioned, Ella?
This is I know that not everybody will agree with me on this, but whilst the cost of the devices and the hardware to run them is definitely a massive factor, I just think that most people don't want to sit in their lounge with a headset on and play a lot and disconnect from their families. I just don't think that in itself is something that enough people want to do enough of the time to justify the cost of all the hardware. So I think once the hardware reduces in cost, and I think once obviously it evolves, maybe it'll start to change. But yeah, it's not just about the cost. I think there are other factors as well.
Yeah,
there's a huge difference in just picking up your device and playing something for 10, 15 minutes. And have to go through the rigmarole of putting the equipment. It's just I think that it's the more casual gaming side of things has taken over so much that it's something that is. I just think VR has got, it's got a long way to go.
When you mention these casual games, Deborah, do you mean games that do not require you to spend long periods of time playing, or what's exactly the definition of a casual game?
I think you just. Maybe you can vary yourself. You just said it yourself.
Okay, awesome.
So, it's you don't have to spend a lot of time playing. It's. Of course, you have the hyper casual games, which are designed that you can play 10 minutes and then that's okay and you get your fix. But there are other casual games that are more that have a longer gameplay but are still, that doesn't require you to play hours on end to get anywhere. Yeah,
makes sense now. And we were discussing this in terms of how do you develop the game, right? Are you focusing one specific target market, or is it just a game that is targeting everyone right now? And I wanted to ask you, Deborah, I know your game is promoting a lot of interaction between the different players. It's more like a social platform in which you are basically the most important thing in your game is not the game per se, but the connections you create with someone else, right?
Yeah.
Why specifically you started to create Friendbase with this idea in mind? Why are you focusing explicitly on this type of interaction between the different players?
It actually goes back to 2006, where we ran a virtual world for a couple of years. This was pre-smartphones, only on PC, and we really enjoyed the experience, and our members really loved it. So then, of course, enter smartphones, and we've been watching, we were thinking for a long time now, why are there so few virtual worlds? And this was 2013 when we started. And we decided that, we would just make something quick and easy to see, does it even work? Do the current, do the current players even want to interact in this way? So that was when we created the first very simple version of Friendbase. And we've always said that the trend will become social. There will be more social in gaming. And of course, COVID now has helped this push forward, and other games as well, such as Fortnite, have also pushed social sort of ahead of the game. So yeah, no, I feel that the social aspect for us is something that has been really important to help people connect in a fun and entertaining way, and in a global way. Yeah, it's the social aspect for us.
Makes sense. And you see this social aspect being the key differentiator to actually grow your community, right? I guess.
Well, I mean, when you speak of key differentiators, I mean, there are a lot of virtual worlds out there, although maybe I've seen now that they are called social network games. So depending on your definition, but there are others out there, and there are more starting up. You know, we're not unique in that sense. I think we are unique in the way how we combine the social aspect with mini games, with quizzes, and the content. So that sets us aside a little bit from the others.
Yep. And actually, I remember when we first met, you gave me an idea of what your product was, your game was, and then I mentioned, oh, it's like Club Penguin, right? And you told me, oh, Club Penguin disappeared a few years ago, and I did my small due diligence, and yeah, there were no other games that were actually satisfying this type of players. Let's call it that way. So yeah, I think it's going to be a great success just to go back into this interaction and mini games and just creating this community. In the other hand,
we've seen a big growth this past year. You know, completely organic growth, much due to COVID, and that people are finding different ways to interact. So, and there's so much one can do on that field. So it's something that we're really excited about.
Definitely, and I can tell you, being a gamer myself, I used to play a lot of World of Warcraft back in the day, and the thing I enjoyed the most was just having these conversations with people that, even though we didn't meet in person, we were spending 5 hours together every single day. We knew like our lives really good and just became like really close friends. And in the other side of the spectrum, well, maybe not in the other side completely, because actually your game also has some type of interaction, Justin, but your game is more focused on getting really cool graphics, more on the competitive side. Even though you have some type of interaction with other players, it's more about collaboration and not creating these close relationships. Why did you choose this type of game and the community aspect of it?
So we definitely focus a lot more on the competitive side of things with Neuroslices. I think traditionally the genre of game has always had a large competitive aspect to it. Definitely, you know, esports focused. And this is something that we wanted to obviously continue while offering a very different way of playing to our players within the genre. Traditionally, real-time strategy games are focused a lot on micromanagement of units, whereas we took this away and we replaced it with a lot more in-depth base building and territory control, etc., etc. But one of the key things that we wanted to try to do is bring in a new audience as well, because traditionally within real-time strategy games, the competitive side is very, very hard to get into for new players. And I think this is one of the key reasons why the genre hasn't grown very much over the last 10, 15 years. It has a very, very steep learning curve. And the majority of players are looking for more visceral, quick and easy to pick up type games nowadays, but especially since the kind of the birth of mobile gaming. And so we wanted to try to create an experience where we can get players interested in competitive play by using narrative and using world building. So that has been kind of like the key focus for Neuroslices is creating a really in-depth world, really interesting characters to interact with, and then combining that competitive aspect with story-driven missions as well, so that people are kind of eased into the competitive side of things. Which I haven't really seen any other games really try to do in any way. Most competitive games, if you look at like the classic big competitive games like League of Legends or I'm trying to think of some other good examples.
StarCraft.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Like,
StarCraft is an interesting one, but they separate their campaign from their competitive league, whereas with us we combine the two together.
Makes sense.
Something like League of Legends, all of their narrative, all of their world building is done outside of the game through their trailers and through their merchandising. Very little of it is actually done within the game itself. So we obviously try to integrate all of that within.
I guess also Street Fighter could be one example in which the only thing you are doing is it's battling each other, but at the same time there is like a story behind they're trying to make. True,
exactly. You know, obviously they exploited the IP and made an incredibly terrible movie. I think they're about to do another new movie. I've heard recently that might be better. I know they're doing a new Mortal Kombat movie. But yeah, so we wanted to kind of create a rich and vibrant world that was suitable to tell many different stories in. And Neuroslices is like the kind of hub of all those stories. But we're actually developing other products within the IP that tell different stories, set before, set after, set in between. For us, it was all about creating a really interesting brand more than anything. But yeah, so the focus is we still wanted to create a sense of collaboration with players, especially even in the competitive scene. The competitive scene can often be seen as quite toxic. And we wanted to try to avoid that. So, we started building a community very, very early on with our game, sharing very, very early builds of the game. And we had a policy from day one, no toxicity within the community. And this has ended up leading to a really, really nice community to be part of, where players want to help each other. They want to teach each other how to play. They want to provide advice to each other. And I think that's a great kind of foundation for the future of the community once we eventually launch. Hopefully it stays that way. We'll see.
Ella, you obviously have a lot of information regarding what's happening backstage with all the game developers trying to determine what their business model is going to be. Also, obviously, the amount of graphic intensive structures and items are going to be appearing in the game. I wanted to ask you, where do you feel the industry is going regarding high fidelity graphics versus low fidelity graphics? Like, we have seen some games released in the last few years that are like basically a movie in terms of the quality of the image you get. And at the same time, you have also really successful games that maybe they don't have the same, just the same graphic design and the required computing power, such as Minecraft, for example, comes to my mind. It was a huge hit. The design of the game was very cartoonish, not a lot of high resolution. Well, after that, it became the high resolution, but not a really high resolution game. What do you feel is right now the most important things that a game developer should have in the back of their minds when designing their games? Should they focus more on having a great graphics and not focus so much on the storyline behind it, or is it more about the gameplay, or it's a mix of everything? What do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously it does depend on the genre. So, but I would say that games tend to fall into two broad categories. Maybe I'm just making this up as I go, but broadly speaking, you've got some games that almost would be questioned whether they're games, as in they are so linear that they are almost interactive fiction. And I think in those instances, then graphics is obviously everything. And in fact, we're seeing, games technology being used to create, TV and film content now. So, the merging between sort of film and TV and games in that sphere is increasing, and particularly like in VR and in this kind of interactive story type thing. I think those are really interesting areas. And obviously in that area, the way that the game looks is everything. But I think in most cases, apart from that, gameplay is everything. The visual style supports the theme of the game, and the theme of the game needs to suit the genre and the audience. I think that as you said, there's lots of games that are low fidelity that show that graphics is not everything, as long for a lot of games. But then Justin's game as an example, the graphics are beautiful, and that is a key part of what will sell the game, because for that genre, that audience, and for what they're doing, that's the right thing to do. For other games, it's not. So it's not. I mean, it's not. I wouldn't say there's a sort of one size fits all at all. But I mean, I believe that games should be built around mechanics fundamentally, and everything else should come from that.
Can I just throw in one little?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I mean, thank you so much for saying our game looks lovely. But the funny thing is though, even though our game does look nice, all the models and everything are actually quite simplistic, and they don't take very much time to produce. And I think this is one of the key things that a lot of developers need to understand, that if you're going to create a free-to-play game or a live service type game, you have to find a very it's a very fine balance between making things look really good and making things in such a way that the cost of production to create new assets is kept as low as possible.
Yep.
Because you're going to be having to create more and more content as time goes on. And if it's costing you $3,000-4,000 to create a single model, then that isn't sustainable in the long term. Most of the models in our game, although they look good, that's down to our art director being an awesome artist. But most of those models don't take very long to build. They take less than a day to build. I think you can make a game look really good. It's all about stylization. I mean, a great example is the recently released Valheim that just came out on Steam 3 weeks ago. The game looks really nice when you're in there, even though they're using very low resolution textures and very simple models. The game, because of the way that they've done the lighting and everything else, actually looks really nice. That game was developed by a team of 5 people. It sold over 5 million copies in 3 weeks at a price point of $19.99. They've generated almost $100 million in 3 weeks from a game that didn't take them that long to build. But it's because they were sensible about how they built the product. They kept their art style relatively simple, but had a very good art direction. And they used procedural generation for much of their world, which obviously reduces the time spent on development. And I think this is how you build an online game. It's all about being sensible about production, using things like procedural generation, and then being sensible about art direction and keeping costs low. But that doesn't mean things can't look amazing.
That's incredible, and especially I really like the answer from Ella saying gameplay is everything. And I think, as you mentioned before, that's related to the genre you're focusing on. So if Justin is focusing on strategy games, maybe the players in that are expecting to see this type of graphics and explosions and high resolution in textures and etc. And maybe, for example, in your case, Deborah, they are not expecting that, right? So
No,
I remember seeing some gameplay or of Friendbase. And it's a cartoonish model, and maybe they are not expecting this type of super complex animations. And that's because your users and your target market are not expecting that. They're expecting a very simple, straightforward
that is
game.
correct. That is correct. And I mean, as we move forward as well, we are moving more and more towards being towards user-generated content as well, so that the users feel that they can design their own elements. The whole back end of the quiz is being built so that they can design their own quizzes, because that also both drives engagement, and of course it will enrich the platform without us having to be the ones that do, that generate all the content ourselves. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think the whole idea of user-generated content is something that's really interesting for the type of genre that we're working with.
In that you will be allowing the users to create their own items in your game,
yes.
Or just create their. I think you also allow them to create their own houses, for example, right?
Yes, I mean currently it's on a very basic level, but as we move forward, there are going to be more graphical elements where they will be able to, like building blocks, where they'll be able to mm-hmm. create their own designs that are more unique than what we can offer today.
Terrific. And now I want to jump to another topic. I guess most of the viewers right now, they should have played an online game through their lives, and maybe they are on the consumer side. But I want to hear about what's happening behind the scenes. What do you need to do to actually design, develop, and publish a game? I don't know if you can share some insights, like a brief summary of what's happening behind the scenes from an indie studio in your case for developing this type of games. Maybe we can start with you, Deborah. Like, what's the thinking process, and then how you publish your game? Like, what's
Well, I mean, we've always been a really, really small team. So we are lucky that we have the most amazing people in the team that can put on many different hats. So we have been able to create the first version of Friendbase on a team of 3. So it's not been that complicated for us, because also all of us have worked in the game industry before. We've published games before, and so on. And it hasn't been a complex procedure for us to do it. But I think if you were to ask in general what you should think about when you produce a game, I find that there are so many talented and creative teams out there. I mean, they are creative, they have the most amazing graphics, they come up with the most amazing gameplay, and so on. And as Ella mentioned, the whole game mechanics. But what I find, though, is that sometimes they completely miss that there is a life after release as well. They need to learn how to build their community and their audience and their fan base. And that's actually, it takes a lot of time and work. And you cannot expect that you can just release your game and then the whole world will suddenly find it. And then, of course, Justin, you mentioned, was it Valheim? That made X million dollars in a very short period of time. I mean, they are very few and far apart, these huge success stories. So I think that something that's really important is to build a fan base, or a community, and the business model. What is your business model? I think that that's something as well that lacks in many games that are released. And I've seen, I have some close friends that have developed a couple of games, and they completely missed out on the whole build a community thing. And what are you going to do once the game is released? And it's just not going anywhere. And it's sad, because they are so talented and it's such a great game. And it's dead in the water.
Absolutely. Ella, I don't know if you want to add something to that, since you are continuously helping companies in this process.
I could talk about this all day. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the main thing is that the way that games are developed has changed, along with the fact that, as Deborah said, and as we've already discussed, most games are kind of living experiences of some kind. What that means, though, from a developer point of view, is that your opinion is not the one on which you should be basing all your decisions anymore. The game designer is not the person who should be saying what is best for the game. The community is. And as a developer, your entire process, your entire thinking, everything you do should be based around, when am I going to test and what am I testing, and how quickly can I get to the point where I'm getting data and basing decisions off that. So, we with the way we work, we've probably taken this to, in some ways, the extreme. The terms like alpha, beta, so we don't use those terms anymore because they're not really relevant. What we're looking at is, what is the first thing we need to test? Probably the core mechanic. Then what do we need to test? Probably some of the context needs. Then what do we need to test? Retention, and then monetization. And so we actually build, when we're working with developers, we build the processes around that. And ultimately, the goal is, what data do you need to gather to prove that your game is ready to launch? So we call that kind of readiness. So it's like, what data is it you need to know that your game is a minimum viable product? And as soon as you've got that, then you should be launching. So you should be launching as quickly as possible with a smaller version as possible, and then building from there. So, launch is, as Deborah said, is really the beginning, not the end. And basing everything on data and scaling and creating repetitive, endless play is really what it's about. So everything that you do should be focused on that, not on I have a vision for a game and I'm going to make what's in my head.
Absolutely. And that's what I wanted to hear. And as a follow-up question, so when you are designing your game, you are so if you start developing your game, you're still making changes on the strategic plans of your game, in terms of maybe you already have an idea of the gameplay, but maybe you're going to be changing the business model or the revenue model. Am I correct? Or once you set your course, you are not changing it by any means in that regard?
No, I'd say you have to evolve it. I mean, I think the worst mistake you can ever make as a game developer is to try and design your game completely up front. Like, it pretty much guarantees that it will fail. Somebody posted on Twitter recently, and I wish I could credit the person, but they said games are not software. Games are made from software, but they are not software. And I think it's really important, because games are coded, people associate it with building software. And I have built software, and I can tell you it is fundamentally different. You know, a game is an experience, and all you can do is have a hypothesis and then test that, create something and then test that hypothesis. We used to test that internally and go, Mr. or Mrs. Game Designer, do you think this is good? And they go, yes, it's great. My idea was wonderful. And we go to the next phase. Now we go, let's get our users to test it. Was our hypothesis any good? We do A/B testing, and then we see and we iterate from there, which is why things take time, but also how you get to that kind of sweet spot with what makes a great game.
Yep, you make sure that once you publish, they're going to be successful. Sorry, Deborah.
No, it's quite all right. I mean, Ella is quite right in the whole sort of iteration, and I think that when we our very first version of Friendbase had very, very little content, and we basically asked our members or our players, what do you want next? I mean, that because we have that type of live interaction with them. I mean, we can just jump in as our own avatars and speak to them and say, what do you like? What do you don't like? What do you want us to develop next? Why don't you draw something for us? And I think that's something that has been successful for us, is because we always ask them what they want next.
Absolutely.
We've tried coming up with a couple of our own ideas, and some have failed miserably and some have worked out really well. But as Ella said, try fast and fail fast in some cases.
Validate your ideas and then go big.
And be willing to can a game, be willing to walk away and say this game isn't any good. Like, that's really important. And that's
and probably the hardest part.
Be able to kill your darlings is really, really hard. I mean, I thought I had a brilliant idea for content for Friendbase, and we tried it out and it didn't work at all. And so that was really sad for me, but it's just the way it is.
We've even gone to the extreme now where, when we're working with developers, we actually do user testing before they even start building the game. And we all, as long as, they're at that stage in the process, we would always recommend starting to test literally before you start building, if you can.
Makes sense. And moving on to the other part of the design and development, Justin, you mentioned that the story behind the gameplay is also very relevant. So I wanted to ask you, what is your thoughts regarding how much effort the game developer should put on the lore behind the gameplay and behind the game, than to just focus on the gameplay and the graphics and the community aspect? How important is this story behind the actual game?
It very much depends on the game. Lore and narrative are just another hook that you can use to bring in an audience. And not all players are attracted to narrative and story. Some people just want pure gameplay. They want to create their own stories. It's just something that for us as a team resonates with us. We love narrative. We love stories. This is the main type of games that I love to play, and I also know lots of other gamers who we've spoken to who play games solely for the stories. But it should never be more important, I think, than any other aspect of the game. I think everything needs to have its
balance.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if the gameplay isn't any good, then no one's going to get interested in the story. If the game is purely about the story, then that's fine. If you want to have a lot of these walking simulator games, that were popular a while back. They were very heavily focused on storytelling and a lot less so on gameplay. But people knew that that's what they were getting into when they were going to play them. It's about finding the balance that's right for that particular game, and what you as the developer want to use as your main hooks to get players in. Depending on the type of players that you're trying to attract. One of the key things that we've been trying to do with Neuroslicers is narrative is there to try to onboard players into competitive play, but it's not forced upon the player, I would say. I mean, you can quite easily, or the plan at least is to allow competitive players to jump straight into competitive play without, dealing with the narrative. But for the players that want to engage with the narrative, they can, and there's a considerable amount of it planned for the game. So it's about providing options to different types of players, because there are such a wide variety of player personas out there. Obviously, you can't attract every single type of player, but trying to aim your product towards a handful of different ones is always a good thing to try to do. Especially with what we were trying to do, where we're trying to expand the potential player base of the RTS genre. So we wanted to find ways in which to attract perhaps a slightly more casual audience or mid-core gamer audience. And this is something that we tested very, very early on, going back to the kind of conversation about community. We started building our community back when we had our first prototype, and we were already taking the game to events way before most people take their games to events. And we were asking people, what do you think of these mechanics? What do you think of this? And we were already building up our newsletters. We were already building up our mailing list. And then eventually building up our Discord community, where we're constantly testing builds with our community. And it's off the back of that you can start to get an idea. Okay, we're actually managing to attract super hardcore competitive gamers, but we're also attracting people that have never played RTS games before or barely touched them. And it's through that data, through that kind of early community building, you can start to see, okay, this is the demographic of the type of players that I'm attracting. Maybe I should focus more on this aspect of the game, or maybe I should focus a bit more on this aspect of the game. Based on the people that you are attracting to your community through the outreach that you've done.
Yeah, but definitely having a game that allows this flexibility in choosing what you want to do, I think it just basically increases your target market size, right? So that's beneficial for everyone, not only the game, but also the players, because they can choose what they want to do in your game. So yeah, terrific. Before we have to jump to the next panel, I would like to ask you one last question. Obviously, everyone here on this conversation is a gamer, so I just want to ask you, for out of curiosity, which one is your favorite platform for playing online games? I think we will have some skewed answers here, but I just want to hear them. Ella, let's start with you.
So, well, I mean, my most common platform, mobile, just because it's so accessible. That's just the reality. I think I personally love PC games, but the time that I have to play them is so limited that mobile is definitely the biggest platform for me.
Mm-hmm. Deborah?
Mobile as well, for the same reasons. And then next after mobile is console games. But mobile definitely, because of the ease of it.
Which console game?
I like things like anything to do with racing games is fun.
Okay, nice. I like it. Justin, what about you?
So I'm predominantly a PC and console gamer. I mean, I do play on my mobile generally when I'm on the toilet, but that's about it. But yeah, so I'm generally playing a lot of online games, both on PC and console. Yeah.
Terrific. Now that you mention it, it's pretty interesting to see how I'm changing the way I'm playing. But I'm actually using more my cell phone to play because of these small periods of time in which I don't have. Probably when I was on my teenage years, that I had hours and hours to configure my PC to the game I was going to play and set everything like really cool. And now it's way easier with the mobile games. Just open the app, play for 5 minutes, and go back to work or whatever. But yeah, I'm still a PC gamer. Unfortunately, I haven't played so much, but I will in the future. I expect that to be in my plans. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Deborah, Ella, Justin. Thank you so much for sharing the information, what's happening behind the scenes, and what's happening with your products, with your babies. So thank you so much again for sharing that, and hopefully we will meet in another panel for maybe not online gaming, but just regular gaming or the future of gaming without any distractions from the online part. But yeah, thank you so much again for coming here. Thanks, Newchip, for hosting this panel. And I hope you enjoy the rest of Demo Week. Thanks for coming.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for having me.
Thank you.